This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Shelby Varner with the K-State Radio Network. Director of the Kansas Farm Service Agency, Dennis McKinney, begins today's show with information on a variety of programs for producers, as many have deadlines soon. Keeping the show rolling is Dana Vanlandingham from K-State's College of Veterinary Medicine to discuss Japanese Encephalitis Virus. We are also joined by Ron Wilson, Director of the Huck Boyd National Institute, with a Kansas profile on Rommey Farms. The show concludes today with K-State's Brad White, Bob Larson, and Brian Lubbers on another part of the Beef Cattle Institute's Cattle Chat podcast, as they discuss constructing a plan to prevent disease outbreak with your replacement heifer pen. That and more is coming up ahead. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we start our Wednesday show with some information from the Farm Service Agency. And this week we're joined by the State Director of the Kansas Farm Service Agency, Dennis McKinney. Dennis, thanks for joining us today.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Dennis, talking about a few different programs happening at the Farm Service Agency, there's new CRP sign-up.
That's right. Just announced starting today through the end of March is new sign-up 61 for General CRP program. That's just starting. One of the things I stress, for general CRP, the payment rates are a little lower than some of the other CRP programs. However, you have more grazing flexibility. It can be grazed every other year. Under emergency grazing, of course, that's free if you're in a drought. Under non-emergency grazing, you can graze up to 120 days on that CRP. And for the reduction, they reduce your payment by 25%. But that's available every other year on non-emergency grazing, which gives a lot of beef producers, a lot of those who graze livestock, some flexibility to use those acres. And it's great for us because it lets us improve the grass stands. And like they say now, if it's good for the herd, it's good for the bird. We're actually improving wildlife habitat when we do that.
And is continuous CRP still taking place?
Continuous CRP is still going on. There's two continuous CRP signups right now. One of them is for upland game, which is statewide. The other one is for lesser prairie chicken, which is primarily in western Kansas. And those programs, of course, will have a little higher rental rate, and those typically can be 10 to 15-year contracts, a little bit longer than the general CRP.
And another program currently taking place at the Farm Service Agency, dairy margin coverage.
That's right. The opportunity now for smaller producers, those that produce up to 5 million pounds of milk a year, to increase their production history. That production history is what their payment is paid upon. The payment is made when the markets are very low. So that will go on through April the 29th. There's a formula there they can follow to increase their production history, and that would then accordingly increase the payments for those smaller dairy producers.
And for that program, really important to have your records from the past.
That's right. You need to have good records, good production records, take those in, verify your production, and then you can raise that production history that you use for the program, for the dairy margin coverage program.
Also wanting to mention the loan programs that are continuously happening at Farm Service Agency.
That's correct. Our loan programs are funded. Our emergency loan program is not funded right now. We're waiting on appropriation for that. But all of our other loan programs are in effect, whether it's for farm ownership or operating loans or the guaranteed loans, where we partner with banks in the communities to guarantee loans for producers who are having trouble getting credit. Particularly, probably the most important programs are for beginning farmers. And that can include someone who's been in the military for 20 years or coming out, they want to get started, or it could be, an 18-year-old coming right out of high school wants to get started. But we have good programs for beginning farmers to help them get started, get a foothold, get the liquidity they need so that, 3 or 4 years from now, their debt service payments aren't taking up all of their operating money. So that's one of our primary goals there, is help them get started, get a foothold, and maintain their liquidity for those first few years. Those of us who've been in farming for a while, we've all been there when had the conversation with the spouse and had to explain why. Well, we've got fairly good net worth, but we don't have any money on hand. Those years when grain prices are tough, and then we're wondering, hey, what happened here? I thought I had some money when I filled out my balance sheet, and that's our goal there: help people get started and maintain their liquidity while they get those first few years of operating.
And really, a big part of that is the interest rates.
That's right, both interest rates and the time we allow for paying back the loan. For some of those young farmers in a farm ownership program, we will set that up in many cases on a 40-year loan. And that, again, that's to help them maintain their liquidity as they work into it and start expanding their operation. So both lower interest rates and the time in which the loan would be repaid. One of the things I'd comment that we're seeing right now, say a year ago in 2023, 2022, 2021, most of our requests for loans for operating, if they were new loans or expansions, or for farm ownership loans to buy real estate. Now, after 2 years of drought across the state, we're seeing more requests to help people restructure and get the liquidity they need to remain in business. That has me concerned because we're not out of the woods yet on this drought. I've traveled the state, in the area I'm from, down around, Coldwater, Greensburg, that area. It's interesting because you'll see places like Coldwater, Meade, Elkhart, probably in better shape than Parsons and Manhattan as far as percentage of rainfall they've received compared to normal or based on subsoil moisture. We still have a lot of parts of the state that don't have a lot of water in the ponds, don't have a lot of subsoil moisture. The next month is pretty critical. Through the end of April is pretty critical for getting the next crop up and getting it established. And so that we need to keep an eye on that.
And that's just one of the ways that the Farm Service Agency is helping producers. And another way is NAP insurance. And first, what is NAP insurance?
NAP insurance is for non-insured crops, your non-traditional crops, or crops where the Risk Management Agency does not offer insurance. So it might be forage sorghum. If you live, western two-thirds state, a lot of forage sorghum gets baled up for hay or put up for silage. We'll also see we have some specialty producers produce flowers, fruits, vegetables, those kinds of things. So the NAP insurance is out there for those non-traditional and specialty crops that don't have RMA coverage. I would add, though, that RMA has improved its coverage for those greenhouse producers that raise greenhouse crops. So they want to check with your insurance agent, your crop insurance agents to see what is offered there now through the Risk Management Agency, through the private insurance agents.
And when is the deadline for NAP insurance?
Deadline for spring planted crops is March 15th, so please get signed up for that.
And there is also another program that has a deadline of March 15th.
That's accurate. That's the sign-up. You need to be completed your sign-up to choose whether you're going to be in the ARC program or the Price Loss PLC Price Loss Coverage program. That needs to be done. We're running behind right now on those sign-ups, behind where we usually are. I think part of it is the dry conditions across the state. Producers are trying to decide, hey, do I want to be under ARC or under PLC? What's going to happen here if we don't get any rain? I probably prefer to be under ARC. On the other hand, if it's just low crop prices, I want to be under PLC. So a lot of people are delaying that decision. Please go ahead, go to the FSA office, get signed up. You can, up through March 15th, you can change your mind and change one of those. But if you at least have something on file, be done so our folks don't get stuck with a whole lot of work in the last 48 hours. Please get that election made.
And always willing to remind producers where they can find all this information and more.
That's right, Farmers.gov. I'd also point out that if you go to USAjobs.gov, you can see where we would have career opportunities with the Farm Service Agency and USDA in general. You can go ahead and see what's available. You can also go ahead and create a profile on there with your resume. So if a job does come up you're interested in, you can apply. That would be USAjobs.gov or on farm programs, Farmers.gov.
Dennis, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today and give us an update of programs taking place at the Farm Service Agency.
Appreciate the opportunity. At USDA, a lot of new things going on, both with Farm Service Agency and the Natural Resources Conservation Service. But as I always say, we have the privilege of partnering with the world's best farmers and ranchers to help improve habitat, reduce erosion, and continue to have the world's safest and most abundant food supply.
That was Kansas Farm Service Agency State Director Dennis McKinney. The deadline for NAP insurance and ARC and PLC registration is March 15th. If you'd like to find more information about those programs or any other programs from the Kansas Farm Service Agency, you can always find it by going to Farmers.gov. I will link that in today's show notes on agtoday.net. Before we cut to a break, we're going to be joined by USDA's Rod Bain and USDA meteorologist Brad Rippey as they discuss USDA's end of February State Stories report that provides a look at mostly improving winter wheat conditions over the course of the season.
What does winter wheat crop conditions look like as a whole among states reporting to USDA this time of year? USDA meteorologist Brad Rippey says within the end of February edition of the Agriculture Department State Stories Report,
the good news for winter wheat is that we have had a relatively easy winter. The crop, generally speaking, has seen improved moisture since planting, and other than a cold outbreak that hit in mid-January, we have escaped significant weather challenges that could have hurt the crop.
Yet, what does that mean on a state level?
Conditions in our number one production state improving. Kansas, which went into this winter with just 32% of the winter wheat rated in good to excellent condition, has seen improvements each month and now coming in at 57% good to excellent. At the same time, Kansas wheat rated very poor to poor was 32% near the end of November. That has since dropped to 13%.
Rippey adds similar condition trend improvements are noted for winter wheat throughout the winter in the Great Plains and Midwest.
We have a long list of states where the winter wheat is rated at least 2/3 good to excellent. Just going alphabetically through those, we have California, as well as Indiana, Missouri, North Carolina, Ohio, Oklahoma, all making that list of at least 2/3 good to excellent.
Meanwhile,
we only have 2 of our reporting states with double digits in the very poor to poor categories as of February 25th. That is Kansas at 13%. The other state in double digits at this time is Texas, 19% very poor to poor.
So Rippey summarizes the winter wheat crop outlook via reporting states in the February State Stories edition.
A pretty optimistic look at the winter wheat situation as we head into spring, with only about 1/8 of the U.S. production area currently experiencing drought, down from nearly half of the crop at planting.
I'm Rod Bain reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
Once again, that was U.S. Department of Agriculture's Rod Bain and U.S. Department of Agriculture's meteorologist Brad Rippey, and he was discussing the USDA's end of February State Stories report that provided a look at the winter wheat crop conditions over the course of the season. We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but stick around because we have more for you ahead. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we continue our Wednesday show discussing Japanese Encephalitis Virus. And then to talk about it, we're joined by diagnostic medicine pathobiology professor in K-State's College of Veterinary Medicine, Dana Vanlandingham. Dana, thanks for joining us today.
Hi, thank you.
Dana, what is Japanese Encephalitis Virus?
So it's a virus that's currently found over in Asia that's transmitted by mosquitoes to pigs and people. It causes severe neurological symptoms in people and potentially death, and also neurological problems with the pigs.
You mentioned humans and pigs, so a zoonotic disease?
Yes, zoonotic, and it also affects birds.
So what really effect does it have on the swine?
So the swine has a really high percentage of the piglets will die. The older pigs, not as much of a problem.
And what about for humans?
For humans, it can affect any age group, and if they are infected, it has a pretty high mortality, like in the 30% range, and a lot of the people that recover from it will have lifelong neurological problems.
And is this something we're currently seeing in America?
No, it's never been here.
And so where is it currently at?
So it's in Asia. It goes all the way from India to Australia. It came into Australia a couple years ago.
And it can be pretty fatal, like you mentioned. And so how are people combating that?
So in Asia, they do have a vaccine that they give a lot of people that are at risk. So it's a pretty effective and good vaccine that they use.
And so why is this something you're looking into right now?
So we kind of like to look out beyond the United States and see what potentially could come into the U.S. that could affect our agriculture and our people. And this is one of the viruses that people have on their radar that's mosquito transmitted, very similar to what we saw with West Nile virus.
Kind of the similar theory of African swine fever, not here yet, but could be really bad if it does get here?
Yes, exactly. That's tick-borne pathogen that if it did come into the U.S., it could really be devastating to the pigs. That is not a zoonotic, though.
And so from this research and from this work you've been doing, what are you really seeing for America?
Well, we checked the different mosquitoes, and we found out that they can transmit the Japanese encephalitis. And we looked at domestic pigs, and we also looked at their special small pig that's not a true feral pig, but it has a feral pig genetic background in it, and those pigs are susceptible to JEV.
If people are traveling to Asia, is there something they might need to do before they go?
If they're going to somewhere that's got a high mosquito population, like they're hiking or camping or something like that, they may want to think about taking the Japanese encephalitis vaccine before they leave. They need to just talk to their travel medicine person and see if they really are at risk. But if they're not going to be exposed to mosquitoes, they may not want to take the vaccine.
Dana, you mentioned it being fatal for humans, and so is there something that treats it if they do get it, or is it just managing the symptoms?
Unfortunately, most of the mosquito, if not all of the mosquito-transmitted viruses that I work on, it's mostly supportive care. There's really not a whole lot you can do.
Is Japanese encephalitis virus something that producers need to keep in mind, or really just letting USDA or someone bigger worry about it, and then if something happens, they'll let you know?
It's a potential for USDA to keep on their mind. Okay. But as far as a producer, until it comes, if it comes, it may not come, just like African swine. And, in reality, something else will probably come that we aren't. But, it's on the radar because it is on the move. It moved into Australia in the last few years. So it is kind of moving. African swine fever is definitely on the move. It's gone into Puerto Rico and stuff. So there are these viruses that are kind of moving around, and there is a potential threat. But as far as an actual person on the ground, wait until you're told that it's here. That's my opinion.
Dana, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today and share with us some information about Japanese encephalitis virus.
Okay, well, thank you.
That was diagnostic medicine pathobiology professor from Kansas State University's College of Veterinary Medicine, Dana Vanlandingham, and she was discussing Japanese encephalitis virus. This virus is not in the U.S., however, just wanted to make it aware of you as it is in the world, but as Dana mentioned, not really something for Kansas producers to be worrying about at this point. Before we cut to a break, we're now going to be joined by Ron Wilson from the Huck Boyd National Institute for Rural Development here at Kansas State University with a Kansas profile. This week's Kansas profile is Susan Rommelfinger. Her family had a big garden growing up. However, today, her and her husband own Rommey Farms, which produces fresh produce, eggs, honey, and flowers. In addition, Ron talks about how their farm has a story walk to educate children about pollinators, and they've also created a Prairie Wellness Foundation to promote healthy food. We're now going to be joined by Ron as he shares with us some more information about Rommey Farms.
This is Kansas Profile. I'm Ron Wilson, director of the Huck Boyd National Institute for Rural Development at Kansas State University. The child walks along a path next to a verdant garden surrounded by farm fields, pausing every few feet to read a few more pages from a children's book as displayed on stands along the way. This is a story walk. It was created by an innovative farm couple who are producing fresh products while educating the public about food. It's today's Kansas Profile. Susan and Don Rommelfinger own Rommey Farms, which has a story walk located on it. It's one example of the way they are connecting with consumers. Susan grew up on a ranch near Towanda where she was active in 4-H. My dad always had a huge garden. We enjoyed those fresh vegetables, she said. She attended Butler Community College and Friends University. Her sister moved to Cassaday. When Susan went to visit, she found the annual Cassaday Hog Roast and Fire Hall Dance was underway. Here she met Don Rommelfinger. Rommelfinger had grown up in Greeley and attended Pittsburgh State. He became ground supervisor at Butler Community College and lived at Cassaday, where he was also the fire chief. When Don met Susan at the fire hall, there must have been a spark between them. You might say that it kindled a romance. Okay, no more fire jokes. The Rommelfingers were married in 2015. They bought land west of Cassaday. Susan became an extension master gardener. Ever since I was a little girl, it's been my dream to bring fresh, locally grown, sustainably produced foods to my community and the surrounding communities, Susan wrote. They tilled up a half-acre plot of garden and started producing. They called it Rommey Farms for short. In the first year, they took produce to the Old Town Farmers Market in Wichita. The business grew from there. Pendleton's at Pendleton's Country Market near Lawrence helped us get going, Susan said. When the pandemic hit, Shop Kansas Farms helped as well. Rommey Farms is also a member of the Kansas Department of Agriculture's From the Land of Kansas program. We wanted to develop a relationship with our customers, Rommelfinger said. They established a CSA, which stands for Community Supported Agriculture. That refers to an arrangement under which consumers agree to receive a regular delivery of a local grower's seasonal produce. People wanted to support us, Rommelfinger said. In the first year, Rommey Farms had 9 CSA members. In 2023, there were 39. In addition to CSA members, Rommey Farms sells directly to consumers through its farm stand, online store, and pop-up tent sales. The Rommelfingers partner with a local nonprofit child care provider service on education. They've also organized a new nonprofit group called the Prairie Wellness Foundation, which promotes healthy ways of growing and consuming nutritious food. Today, Rommey Farms produces lettuces, radishes, peppers, tomatoes, cucumbers, potatoes, green beans, summer squash, cantaloupe, sweet corn, and more. They have a cow-calf herd plus chickens and a 7-hive apiary where they produce their own honey. In the summertime, they produce cut flowers. During COVID, people were calling us and wanting to get outside, Susan said. The Rommelfingers created a story walk on their farm with a walkway around their garden bordered by farm fields and with stations with pages of a children's book. The walkway ends at the greenhouse. We were wanting people to learn about the importance of pollinators, Don said. The current story walk book is called Give Bees a Chance. It's a great opportunity for people to learn where their food is grown, Susan said. We know we're producing the best quality product, and we've met wonderful people, Don said. It's rewarding to know we are making a difference, he said. It's wonderful to find this business at a rural community such as Cassaday, population 113 people. Now that's rural. For more information, see www.rommeyfarms.com. That's ROMMEY farms.com. The child has been on a story walk, reading pages of a children's book at various stations located around this beautiful garden. We commend Susan and Don Rommelfinger for creating this innovative way to share nature and help consumers understand the local sources of their food. They have a wonderful story to tell. For the Huck Boyd National Institute for Rural Development, this is Ron Wilson with Kansas Profile.
Once again, that was director of the Huck Boyd National Institute for Rural Development here at Kansas State University, Ron Wilson, and he was doing a Kansas profile on Rommey Farms, which is owned by Susan Rommelfinger and her husband. You can check out more Kansas profiles from Ron Wilson and the Huck Boyd National Institute for Rural Development by going to the K-State Research and Extension's website. To get to their website, it is www.ksre.k-state.edu. Again, that is www.ksre.k-state.edu. And of course, I will link it in today's show notes, which you can always find on agtoday.net. We're cutting to a short break now, but when we come back, we'll be joined by the Beef Cattle Institute as we hear part of the Cattle Chat podcast.
You're tuned into Agriculture Today. I'm Jacob Cloughton for Shelby Varner, and we end today's show with Brad White, Bob Larson, and Brian Lubbers from the Beef Cattle Institute.
The question was on vaccinations in replacement heifers, and I'm going to frame it as, let's say these are well-vaccinated heifers at weaning, but they've had nothing done to them as we go to their first breeding season. So we're at either that pre-breeding time or at breeding. Brian, I'm going to start with you. What are some of the things you start thinking about when we talk about vaccinating these replacement heifers?
Yeah, so one thing is kind of balancing. You want to have enough protection that you're not going to have disease outbreaks in your herd, right? I mean, that's kind of the basic tenet of vaccination. And even if they're well vaccinated at weaning, there's still going to be a certain percentage that maybe haven't responded to that point. And there are some things that you want to make sure that the level of immunity, if they're vaccinated at weaning, maybe there was still some maternal influence antibody. And so you're trying to cover the herd, right? Is kind of how I'm looking at pre-breeding vaccinations, and especially when I start thinking about vaccines for things that would cause abortions or outbreaks and things like that. That's kind of where my focus is. So for me, it's probably more about the group than it is any particular individual, and so that's how I'm approaching my vaccine plan.
So as you're talking about vaccinating these heifers, is there any concerns or issues if you're vaccinating them near the breeding time?
There's some evidence that maybe we need to be aware of potential negatives, and it's been shown most clearly in heifers that were really naive. In other words, they hadn't built a good immune response, and if we give them kind of their first exposure to a modified live vaccine right at the time of breeding, we might have some negative effects. I think a lot of those concerns go away if we've kind of followed a systematic program and they've been exposed to the vaccine antigens several times leading up to breeding. But in general, one of my recommendations is I prefer not to do much of anything in just the week before they're getting bred. And so if we're getting really close, like at the time if we're using a synchronization protocol or something like that, I'd prefer not to do anything else except the synchronization protocol at that time. So I would say a little bit. There's a little bit of a concern there, and I'm just trying to let the heifer's body focus on getting bred at that time. Which means then, so when do I vaccinate? Well, I just back it up a little bit of time. And so Brian was saying a lot of times when we're vaccinating around weaning, one of our concerns is that's a time period where we're a little bit more concerned about respiratory disease. We're weaning the animals at that time. We might be moving them to a different location, even if it's replacement heifers that are staying on the operation. They may move to a different place and be commingled with other heifers, those types of things. And so I'm really worried about respiratory disease. One of the interesting things is when we talk about viral vaccines, there's two viruses that cause respiratory disease, IBR virus and BVD virus, that can also cause abortion. And so we're actually using the same product. The vaccine for those viruses in weaned calves are really thinking about protecting them against pneumonia. When I'm using that in heifers that are approaching their first breeding season, what I'm trying to do is set them up so that they're protected against abortion. And so those two viruses, IBR and BVD, would definitely be in my vaccination protocol leading up to the time that they're going to be bred. And I'd like a couple of doses into them ahead of the breeding season, but not right before the breeding season. And then some other vaccines that I might include are leptospira, which is a bacteria, and a Vibrio vaccine. They usually are packaged together. And so a lot of times I will give them a vaccine with IBR and BVD viruses and lepto and Vibrio bacteria.
Yeah, and the other thing about the timing part is that because we're working through the immune system, it's a vaccine. It's not a drug where we expect a quick response. We want to back that up. We want to give them, most of them we talk about weeks to months to develop that immune response. And so doing it at the time of breeding, if they've been exposed previously, maybe you get a little bit of leeway, but really we need to give that immune system time to respond. So I agree with Bob, not at the time of breeding. Get it backed up so you get the actual response you're looking for.
That's all we have for you today on Agriculture Today, but we'll be back with more for you tomorrow.